Thank you all for joining me today. For the next hour, we're going to talk about building things that matter. Before we get started, a little context on me. I am a startup investor and advisor. I started my own fund. I've invested in over 70 companies, either as an angel or a venture capitalist. I was previously leading a fund at Andreessen Horowitz. And more importantly, I've been a founder. So I've been in your seats. I've started 2 companies, learned a lot of lessons. So you're going to hear about some of those lessons throughout today's workshop. I also want to make sure that this is an interactive session and I'm not just talking at you. So please interrupt me if you have any questions or if you have any pushbacks to anything that I say. So today we're going to talk about building things that matter, obviously. We're going to go through the jobs to be done framework. We're also going to be talking about how do you identify who you're building a company for, and then how do you bring those 2 things together. And throughout today's session, we'll do a couple of interactive exercises with your specific ideas. But before we get started, show of hands, who's actively working on a company right now? All right, keep your hands up. Who has spoken, out of all of you who's working on a company right now, who's spoken to a current customer or potential customer in the last month? What about the last 2 weeks? What about the last week? What about the last couple of days? It's a good sign. You guys are talking to your customers. I think one of the issues when folks start a company is they usually ideate the company in their head. They come up with a solution, they fall in love with that solution, and then they build a bunch of features, not really thinking about who they're solving the problem for and why they're solving the problem. So that is where the jobs to be done framework comes in. It's really focused on the why you're doing the thing that you're doing. If you think about building a company, it's not just, hey, I have this cool idea, I want to see it in the world. There needs to be a why behind that. And specifically when it comes to the jobs to be done framework, it's really focused around the why. So if you think about anything that you buy, you're not buying the thing because you want to own the thing, right? You don't buy a drill because you want to have a drill in your house. You buy a drill because you want to make a hole. You buy a bottle of water because you're thirsty. And oftentimes, it's about hiring a product or service to fill a need that you have. And so when you're building a company, when you think about the why, people buy things for 3 reasons. They want to make, for 3 reasons, it's either functional, social, or emotional. They want to make some kind of progress. And specifically when it comes to that progress, if you think about functional is pretty self-explanatory. I'm buying it for the utility of the thing. So if we think about that bottle of water, if I'm at the gym, I'm tired, I just need a bottle of water to quench my thirst. And I don't care what brand the water is. It can be Poland Springs, it can be whatever brand. I just need a bottle of water to quench my thirst. But if I'm at a fancy business dinner, and I order a bottle of sparkling water, I'm signaling status. It's because I want to be seen a certain way. So that becomes really, really important and really key. And then from an emotional standpoint, we think about that same water. I had a hard day at work, I want to treat myself. So instead of buying just a regular bottle of water, I want to get Spindrift. I want to get a bottle of flavored water because it's going to make me feel good about myself. And one of the things that, in my experience as an investor, I've seen founders go wrong, or one of the places I've seen founders go wrong is when they launch a product, one, they either think I need to maximize on all of these 3 things, right? Where it's from day one, I need my product to be functional, I need it to be social, and I need it to be emotional. That becomes really, really difficult to market and launch because the messaging is off, right? If you think about car companies, at the end of the day, a car just gets you from point A to point B, right? But each car company has a way they market or a primary progress that they focus on, right? If you think about Volvo, Volvo focuses on the emotional aspect. We're a safe car. So if you buy a Volvo, your family's gonna be safe. If you think about a BMW or a Lexus or any high-end car, they're really focused on the social aspect. People are gonna think you're a wealthy person, right? There's a status aspect there. And then if you think about like a pickup truck, there's a functional aspect to it, right? This is, if you're a farmer, if you're someone that hauls a lot of stuff, it's to get you from point A to point B while you're actually using it for the utility of the product. And we've seen one of the things that is really important is you can launch with a functional aspect and then over time go social or go emotional. You can launch with a social aspect and over time go functional or go emotional, right? So the same thing about with the car example, with the BMW, they then start getting into other types of cars, right? They can get into an SUV, they can get into a pickup, and they're going up and down that progress value chain because it allows you to talk to more customers. And one of the things that's important to remember is when you're building a company from day one, you're really focused on a niche group of customers. And then over time, as you expand and scale, that's when you flex up and down this progress value chain. So one of the things I want to do is let's go through a quick, just a quick exercise of looking at companies that I think we all know, and let's think about their first version of their product. What progress were they focused on? So we'll start with Uber. The first version of Uber, what progress do you think they were focused on? You think so? Who said status? So it's actually status, because the first version of Uber was Uber Cab. It was just the black cars, where it's like, oh yeah, I have my own private driver. Later on, Uber expanded and it became functional, where they went to an Uber X, and then pre-pandemic they actually had an Uber Pool, which is I want to go from point A to point B, but I can't really afford to take an Uber by myself, so I'm okay carpooling with others. What about Airbnb? Which progress do you think they launched with? Ooh, ooh. Why do you think it's social? Sharing space with other people, and that social component. Okay. You mentioned functional. Why do you think functional? Because it's just a different way to basically find a place to stay. Mm-hmm. So it's functional. And the social aspect came later. So functional because the first version of Airbnb was actually just air bed and breakfast. It was very utility. Actually, I think their founding story, again, you always have to be careful around these founding stories because sometimes there's a bit of lore there. But it was during the Democratic National Convention, and hotels were sold out, right? And it was literally a mattress. You can just rent a room and stay in that room, right? So there was a functional aspect to it. But Airbnb is an example of a company that has done a really good job of just flexing up and down. If you look at their ads, when they first launched, it was strictly functional. And then as they got more market share, they decided there's also going to be a status aspect to it. You can literally go on Airbnb right now and rent a castle. I'm not kidding. I have a friend who actually rented a castle for a birthday, right? So you can go on Airbnb, rent a castle. They also have an emotional aspect to it, where the way they market against hotels is stay at an Airbnb and feel like a local, right? So there's that There's that aspect of it where it's like, oh, when I stay at an Airbnb, it's not just because it's a place to lay my head. I also feel like a local. I'm a part of this community. And so it's really, really interesting how they've done a really great job of flexing up and down when it comes to where they fit in sort of like that progress value chain. What about Instacart? Functional, social, or emotional? Emotional? Any other guesses? Why do you think emotional? Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So functional. I think functional, but so I think functional just because you're ordering groceries. But and again, this is don't think about the product. This is the V1 of the product, right? Don't think about the product as it is today. The product when it first launched, there was a functional aspect to it, but now there's also an emotional aspect to it, which is think about it. You're a busy single parent, and you got to pick up the kids. You have to do all of these things. You also have to get groceries. It makes you feel good and capable to know that I don't need to add going to the grocery store to my list of things. I can order groceries and I'm still a capable parent because I'm able to get that done for my family. What about Venmo? Why? Who mentioned social? Why do you think social? Spot on. It's social. Yeah. It's it when you think about Venmo, it's obviously there's a functional aspect to it, right? You can send money. There are different ways to transact and send money. You could use PayPal, but to your point, they launch with like the news feed first. Like I don't know if you guys do this, but whenever I get on Venmo to send money, I kind of look at the I look at the feed. I'm like, yeah, where do they go? Like, why are you sending money back and forth, right? So it's interesting because, and it's also there's a status aspect there, right, where I'm the person that picked up the check and everyone is sending me whatever their portion of the bill. So, what about Tinder? Emotional? Maybe some context there. Why do you think? Yeah, that's a really important insight. You oftentimes you create a product. There's utility at the core of everything that you do, right? But utility alone isn't enough, just because there's this rule of at least in startups, there's this rule where you have to be 10 times better, right? Because it's a switching cost. Where is it? Are you if you're not 10 times better and you're only 5 times better, I'm just gonna stick with what I know, right? Because it's I know this thing, it's good enough, right? I can contend with good enough, but if I switch to you and you're not that much better, it's like a headache for me to be able to switch to. So there's always utility at the core of what you build, but that utility has to be outsized if that's what you're gonna lead with, right? And to your point, spot on. It's emotional, where there's a double opt-in, right? It's I know at least if I swipe on this person and they swipe back, it's already taken away like the fear of rejection. Where in like traditional, I think dating platforms, you reached out to someone and then you're figuring out how they're gonna reach out back to me. There's that fear of rejection there. Last one, Liquid Death. It's a water brand. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but do you think they led with functional? Again, it's water, social, or emotional? Boom. So this is one of my favorites because the reason it's one of my favorites is it solved the need that I had, which is I don't drink. And whenever you're at like a happy hour or a social event and you don't drink, it's your options are you either get a mocktail, which is very sugary, that's not healthy, or especially if you're at a bar, they give you this little plastic cup and they're like, there's water at the end of the bar, right? And then people are wondering like, does this guy even want to be here? You're not participating in the fun that we're all having. So there's a social aspect to it. And then one of the things that they did was it just looks cool. Where I remember when they first launched, people really were unfamiliar with the brand. So whenever they saw you drinking like water out of a tall boy, it was also a conversation starter, right? Which is like, oh, what's that? I've never heard of the brand. And you just, it breaks the ice. It makes it easier to just get to know people and chat with people. And so for me, it really solved an issue that I had. And it's one of my favorite brands just because they literally built $1 billion company off of selling water. And all they did was they actually followed this framework, which was like, what's the why? What's the job to be done? Like water already exists. There are a ton of water brands, but how can we break through? They're not making a better water. They're not saying this is how alkaline water, where if you drink this, your skin is going to be super smooth. They literally just said, this is water in a different packaging. Is a social aspect to it. So now that we went through these examples, one of the things I want us to do is like let's pair up and with your own businesses that you're working on, your own ideas that you're working on, let's try to figure out what's the jobs to be done. So as I mentioned, if you're trying to figure out what the jobs to be done, you really focus on 4 questions, which is what is the customer trying to get done, right? So in the case of Liquid Death, I just didn't want to look awkward when I'm at a social event and I'm not drinking. And what are they struggling with today? I'm struggling with having to decide whether to not drink anything when I'm out, drink tap water, or have a mocktail. And then what alternatives are they currently using? And then why would they fire their alternative to hire you? So why are you so much better? So let's pair up, discuss what you're currently working on, and then after you're done, it's answer this, fill in the blank on this, which is my customer hires us to blank so that we can, right? So Liquid Death, I hire Liquid Death to make me look social so that I don't look awkward, right? And so pair up, we'll do a quick 5 minutes, and then I will pick a couple of people to share what they came up with. And pretty good job. We went 30 minutes before I heard the word AI, so I'm happy. Before we move on, any questions about jobs to be done? Is it pretty clear? Is there anything that's confusing about the concept? All right, perfect. So now we know why we're starting the thing that we're starting, right? So the jobs to be done tells you, this is why I'm doing this thing. This is why someone, or this is why anyone would hire my product or service to fulfill a need. But the word anyone is a very, very dangerous word when it comes to building a company, or everyone, because you want to build a company or build a product or service for a specific group of people. And so now we have to figure out who we're doing this for. And that's where your ideal customer profile comes in, or ideal customer persona comes in. Because one of the things when it comes to building companies that I've seen is sometimes I'll talk to our founder and like, who's gonna use this? Oh, this is for everyone. And if you're building something for everyone, you're building something for no one, right? Because it becomes really, really, you either need to have a lot of money to build something for everyone, because you need to market it in a very, very specific way where when I see it, I'm like, oh, boom, this is for me. So it's very, very dangerous when you're building a company if you don't have an ICP. And so when it comes to an ICP, what is an ICP? An ICP is a very, very specific description of the who you're going after. And ideally, you're looking for three things when it comes to ICP. You're looking for someone who has the problem. So who has a struggle? And just having a struggle alone is not good enough. It's who has a struggle and who's actually ready to move on that struggle. And by ready to move, it means, are they ready to pay you for that struggle? And then are they also aligned with how, like, your product's values, right? What your product stands for. So if you have those three things, you are close to getting what your ICP is. And a strong ICP is, you know who they are, you know what they want, so you know what their beliefs are, you know how to talk to them, you know what levers to pull to get them engaged in what you're trying to sell. One of the things that's important when it comes to an ICP that I tell founders to think about is you have to be really exclusionary in the beginning, because you want to build, there's a concept in building companies where it's like, who are your 1,000 true fans, right? You want to figure out, like, where do you have a lot of people that just love your product? And being able to focus on that becomes really, really important, because it helps you actually scale. And it sounds counterintuitive because you actually have to disregard certain people. And one thing I also want to mention is, I mentioned who's ready to move on this thing. So that's a little tricky, meaning who's willing to pay for it. If you're building an ed tech product and you're building it for teachers, oftentimes teachers are not the ones who are going to pay for it. It's administrators are going to pay for it. But if you get them engaged enough and get them excited enough, they're going to be able to tell administrators, we need this thing, right? So they might not be the direct payers of your product, but you still need to appeal to them and get them excited enough about what you're doing. It's the same with building anything for children, right? Like, the kids are not going to pay you for the product, the parents are. So how do you make sure you are getting them excited enough where they can bug their parents enough where the parents end up paying for the product? So why does an ICP matter, right? It matters for several reasons. I mentioned you actually want to be very niche, and when you start out, you want to just focus on just a small group of people. And the reason it matters is you're then talking to the right people. The worst thing you can do is you build a product and you're having, when we started out, I mentioned who's been talking to a potential customer or a current customer. A potential customer isn't just someone who's interested in your product. It's someone who's interested in your product and can actually pay for the product. I oftentimes see founders who launch, like, they'll tell me they have an MVP. And I'm like, oh, tell me about the results of the MVP. Well, we have customers. We have all these people using a product. Oh, nice. How much revenue do you have from the product? Oh, we're not charging yet. Well, you have a minimal viable product for a free product. You don't have a minimal viable product for the product that you're actually going to launch. You haven't figured out who's actually ready to move on the thing. So part of making sure you're talking to the right people is, are they ready to move on the thing that you're doing? And then also, when you figure out who the right people are, it actually helps you build on features for them. One of the worst things you can do as a founder is build in a silo. All right, so let's just imagine we use the Uber example. Let's imagine when Uber first launched, they launched with all the features they have now, which is we have Uber X, Uber this, Uber that. That's a terrible way to build a product, because one, we mentioned, how are you going to market the product, right? You're marketing to too many people. you're now trying to market using functional, emotional, social. There's like all of these things. Like Uber literally just leaned in on the emotional progress. I think last year when they launched a feature where it allows you to pick a female Uber driver, right? Because some female Uber riders felt safer with a female Uber driver. Right? Uber's been around for what, like I think 15 years, however long. They just leaned into that emotional aspect of it. And it took time, right? It took them actually launching a product, talking to customers, and then getting that feedback. So when you actually figure out what your ICP is, it helps you with a feedback loop of, okay, what should I add on? What should I not waste my time on? And then it goes to the next thing, right? Which is you're not wasting your time. You're saving time and you're actually saving money because you're not running all of these useless experiments. You're actually talking to people who say, if you do this thing, we'll actually pay for it. And oftentimes when you're building a product that's not consumer-based, but it's enterprise-based, I've seen a lot of founders say, oh, we talked to this company, they're excited about what we're doing. They said if we do X, Y, and Z, they're gonna buy into the product. Guess what? You gotta tell them to pay for it, right? And the best way to know if they're ready to move on what you're doing is if they pay before they get the thing, right? Which is, oh, this is great, our team can build this. Can we get a commitment from you? Right? So they've paid for the thing already. So you already know they're the right ICP because you're ready to move. This is something that it's so painful that they're like, I'm ready to pay for this thing. A good way to pressure test this when you're a consumer facing company is I've seen a lot of people do a landing page and people come on the landing page, the product's not out yet, and I enter my email. Right? That's a signal that, yes, I'm excited about what you're doing. I can't wait for you to launch. But not all currencies are created equally. A good way to pressure test is it's not just email, because how many times have you entered an email into something that you don't really care about it. It's, this sounds cool. I want to see when it launches, right? And then email is like the cheapest form of currency we have now. Like I have an email address that I use for online shopping because I know after I use it, they're gonna send me a bunch of spam, right? So that's a cheap form of currency. The way to up level that is if you have a consumer product, it's not just an email, it's can I get your first name, right? And then, ooh, can I get your first and last name? Can I get your phone number, right? So if someone's willing to sit there and a product that's not out yet, I'm gonna give you my first name, my last name, my phone number, if you can get their address, right? So you're collecting all of this information, and the more information you're able to collect, the more you know this person is ready to move once your product is live. But if you're just collecting emails alone, I've seen this so many times where founders will tell me, oh yeah, we have this large waiting list, and the wait list is literally just emails. You don't even have first names. Right? Or you just have first names, which doesn't really mean much, right? But if you're able to collect and aggregate more information, it really shows this person's ready to move. If you're able to get someone's social security number before you launch, like, please don't do that. And then also ICP is a great way to keep your customers happy. I mentioned the Uber example. Female riders are happier because now they have this option, right? Riders who may not have as much money are happier because UberX exists, right? Riders who maybe have a lot more buying potential are happier because Uber Priority exists. Like I want my Uber to come faster, right? And that's just all based on a feedback loop of we've launched, now we're adding on features because we're keeping customers happy. And the secret to actually building and scaling a company, I mentioned early on, you start out, be very, very niche, where you start with a small group of users, and then you eventually expand out. What actually happens is when you have that small group of users, they can become advocates of your product, where they love the product so much, they start telling people about the product. And you know what happens when people start telling people about your product? You're not spending money on marketing. The best form of marketing is hearing about a product from a friend, from someone that you trust. Because inherently, we all are a bit like untrustworthy. Like we don't trust corporations, right? Where it's like, oh, you're just marketing to me. But if a friend uses something and loves it and then recommends it to you, you're more likely to use it, right? So it's like there is happy customers equal a high net promoter score, where it actually helps you scale. So you go from having those 1,000 true fans to those folks bringing more people into the fold, so it actually reduces your customer acquisition costs. And then it also helps you avoid building for everyone, where if you don't have your ICP set up, you're just kind of trying things out. Like, I think this person likes it. I think that person likes it. So when you actually have your ICP set up, you start having conversations. When you start having conversations with founders, with customers, you are triaging and trying to figure out which customer don't I want to go after. Again, it sounds counterintuitive, but you want to be able to fire customers. Right? Oftentimes, we're so desperate as when you start a company, you're so desperate as a founder that you're thinking about vanity metrics. If I can say I have this large number of folks, right? It sounds good. No, you wanna. There's a concept of quality, right? You actually want quality customers. There's something that's actually happening in the startup media space lately, where there's been recently there's been an acquisition. I don't know if you guys saw this. OpenAI acquired a podcast called TBPN, the Tech Bro Podcast Network. They actually don't have a ton of like subscribers or viewers, but what they lack in quantity, they make up for in quality. Because the people who actually subscribe or listen to those things are people who make decisions within tech, right? So you have like Mark Benioff, you have Mark Andreessen, you have all of these people who want to go on this podcast. So that's another thing to think about, where when you're building a company, you want to figure out what part of the value chain are you on, right? If you think about, is this Walmart or is this Hermes, right? And if you decide, okay, I want to be pretty exclusionary in my offering, I don't really need to have a ton of people using my product, but I need to have the right people using my product. That becomes very, very valuable. So not all numbers are created equal when you're thinking about your ICP. But let me pause there to see if there are any questions. So I think when we talk about pay for this, oftentimes people just think monetarily, right? I mentioned the different forms of currency. So it depends. If it is, if you tell me Google is your customer, I expect Google to pay for it, right? And even as an investor, when you tell me Google is your customer, I'm looking into it to figure out, are you using, like, how much are you charging Google, right? There has to be some kind of pain point for me to know your product is worthwhile investing in. Meaning, if you have a product and you're like, Google loves it, it's $10,000 a year, I'm like, I don't think Google loves it. There's probably some department or there's some manager at Google who says, who can say, this is interesting, I'll pay for it. But $10,000 means nothing to them. Like, it has to be, especially if it's an enterprise grade product, there needs to be, like, the CFO signing off on this? Meaning, if the product costs $10,000 and if the product actually costs $10,000, right, and Google's paying for it, they may not actually use the product, right? Because it's not even around an error. Like they discount that. So it becomes, what value do you claim your product? What value do you claim your product produces for the customer? And based on that value, how much are they paying for it? And if you are unable, I think as an investor, if I'm talking to you and you're unable to get a customer to pay for a product, it just means, one, either you're not great at storytelling, and if you're not great at storytelling, I start thinking to myself, okay, if this thing's so great and you're not great at storytelling, it means you probably can't fundraise. It means you probably can't hire talent, right? So there becomes a lot of red flags. So that's why it becomes really important when, given that same Google example, you launch a product and then it's, okay, we launch a product, it's just a pilot. Google, we made an agreement that they're gonna use it for 3 months, actually use it, right? So there's actually user data that we're collecting. Again, that becomes a form of currency for you because they're essentially helping you make your product better. And after 3 months, we're gonna have a discussion with them about paying, and this is how much we told them it's gonna cost, right? So you've already kind of laid the groundwork and said, this is how much the product's gonna cost. Another thing that founders do when it comes to pricing is they get nervous, so they underprice their product because they just wanna have a customer. And if you underprice your product, what's gonna happen is you can't scale, right? Because your unit economics are gonna be off. And you actually also you're never gonna get product market fit for what your actual product is. You're gonna have product market fit for what a cheap product is. And if your product's not supposed to be a cheap product, it becomes really, really difficult to scale. So there are ways to actually use user data and user feedback as a form of currency, especially when you're talking to investors, to say, we're using Google. This is an agreement that we have with Google. For the next 3 months, they're actually using it. We're gonna get actual data of what they're using, actual data of how they're using a product, and then eventually they're gonna pay for it. We check in with them every month, and every month they give us a thumbs up to say we're happy with it. This is something we'll pay for at the end of the 3 months, or we wish this did X, Y, and Z. Can you actually update it to do X, Y, and Z? And when we had that conversation, we said, oh, it's actually gonna cost maybe X plus 30% more, right? So there are ways to have those conversations to show me that eventually you're gonna be able to monetize on this MVP. Okay. Any other questions? Yep. Marketplace is hard, right? So you have the demand and supply side, as Aina mentioned. In specifically with like ride sharing, like a Lyft or an Uber, version 1, the most important person in a marketplace is the driver. And I actually have a little inside baseball information on this. They did not care about the customers. Because if you don't have people to drive, they didn't care about the customers early on, right? Maybe they still kind of don't care, but but it's from day one, you have to make the drivers happy, right? Because if the drivers don't exist, the marketplace doesn't work. The concept of liquidity. If you open up your Uber app, imagine as a user, you open up your Uber app day one, and it takes 15 minutes for you to get a car. You're never gonna use the product again, especially if it's a new product, right? So they did everything possible to make sure that they kept drivers happy. So everything was really focused around drivers early on. And when you run a marketplace, so it's called faking that side of the marketplace. So when you fake a side of a marketplace, you're putting in unsustainable amounts of resources to prop up that side of the marketplace. And then you still have to make it feel like you care about the customers, right? And the fact that you have cars showing up in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that's you saying, I care about you, right? Where we're trying to deliver for you. So when you start a marketplace, the one thing you have to do is figure out what side of the marketplace needs to exist for this thing to even work, right? Customers always had an alternative. They can go on the street corner and hail a cab, right? But drivers is let's really keep them happy just so we can have as high liquidity as possible when we first launch. But great question, thank you. Any other questions around thinking about an ICP on day one? All right. So when you're building an ICP, there are a few things to look at. You look at demographics. So you want to know key facts about who you're building for. And demographics is pretty easy. It's the basic things like how old is this person, where do they live, and so forth. You want to look at their behavior. So what do they do? And then you also want to look at like their psychographics. You also want to look at their psychographics, and then what do they believe in? What are their values? What are their motivations, right? And then you want to check out their goals. Like, what do they actually want to accomplish? And then the last bit of key thing here is like, what's hard for them currently, right? So going back to like the Uber example, I remember specifically when Uber first launched, I was working in consulting, and every Monday morning from New York City, I would have to fly out of New York and go to San Francisco. And for that specific project, I had to be at the client side by 10 a.m. So that meant I took a 9 a.m. flight to be in San Francisco. My pain point was, one, I would get like a cabbie's phone number, and I would say, can you pick me up at this time? And sometimes they would show up. Other times they wouldn't. And then at like 5 a.m., 4 a.m., I'm on the street corner trying to hail a cab, right? So I had a big pain point. So when Uber first came out, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I can wake up, I can like hail a cab. There's this concept in customer experience where people in customer experience they equate the last bit of experience to the entire experience. So as soon as the thing's over, the last thing I remember, how does it all make me feel? And I remember like when you were getting out of cab, so imagine I have a 6 a.m. flight. Sometimes I got to the airport just in time to get on my flight, but I'm getting out of a cab. That's when I have to start putting my credit card in, and I have to figure out like, should I give this driver like a 20% tip? Or it's just like annoying, right? But with Uber, you get to the airport and you just get out the cab, right? So it was like, there was like a peak end experience with that I completely appreciated. And so when you're building products, that's one of the things to also think about, which is just like, it seems like such a small pain point, but it's still a pain point. So if you can drill down and figure out that pain point, that becomes amazing, right? And my goal was to not have to get on the street corner and have to hail a cab at 4 a.m. just to get to the airport, right? So all of this stuff gets solved when you actually think through, okay, who am I building this ICP for, right? I wasn't Uber's ICP. Uber's ICP was actually people who worked in banking that left really late at night. It was like, oh, this is perfect for you. You can, instead of you guys having like a black car service, you can give all their associates an Uber account, and then they can hail a cab whenever they needed to get a cab, right? It just so happened that I fit into that profile because I had this very acute pain point of not having a way to get to the airport at really, really early in the morning. But let me pause there on the framework or the levers to pull on when you're thinking about an ICP. Any questions around that? So with specifically with demographics, I see a lot of founders when they build an ICP. Typically, they focus so much on demographic, where it's part of the pie, but it's not their entire pie, right? Everything needs to fit in. So like the example that I'm giving here is you have let's say it's a college senior who majors in computer science, and maybe they're looking for a job after graduation. And for them, they're busy. If you think about all the things that they do, they're in a library till 11, they're looking for a job after graduation. They don't want to go on LinkedIn. So if you're building a platform for them to find a job, it needs to be something that is like super, super targeted and becomes easy for them to just hop on and for them to use. So always think about, how am I making the job easy for whoever my ICP is, right? And again, it goes back to the 10X rule. Is this 10 times better than if the alternative is like LinkedIn, or if the alternative is them emailing recruiters over and over again? All right, we'll do one more exercise. And so this is around your ICP. So pick a specific ICP for the products that you guys are working on, and then what's their demographic, behavior, psychographics, goals, and pain points. And after we're done, we'll pick a couple of volunteers to share what the ideal customer is, what they struggle with, and their values and so forth. So let's pair up again into groups of two, and let's see what we come up with. So thanks for sharing. Oftentimes, an easy way to unpack that is if you can have it fit into a phrase like this, right? Our customer or our supplier is boom, 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 boom. Again, building startups are experiments, right? So just because on the first pass you say this is who our supplier is, when you go pressure test it, if that's not your supplier, or you go pressure test it and you're like, all right, we figured out they struggle with this, but we actually don't know who the supplier is. We actually don't know what the value is. You can replace that, right? It's early stage founders oftentimes want the thing like fully baked, and it's never really going to be fully baked. And you can't fully bake the thing internally, right? It can't be in your head. You have to go out there and say, I think this is who our supplier is. Let me actually talk to them to see if they'll be interested in being a part of this marketplace, right? So you have the first versions of what your supplier is. Now it becomes, let me actually go talk to the supplier. So this is key. You can't manufacture this thing in a team meeting. You actually have to go out there and have a conversation with the supplier, with whoever the potential customer is, to figure out, are they, one, excited enough to be a part of this thing? Are they someone who's going to add value to my marketplace? When you're building a marketplace, another key is like, are you valuable to the marketplace, right? We have to get away from like having vanity metrics where you don't want to fall into the trap of saying, I have this marketplace and I have 2,000 people on the supplier side. If 90% of the people on the supplier side actually have no intention of ever supplying you, right? I ran into that when I was running a marketplace startup, where on paper, my marketplace looked healthy, but behavior-wise, it wasn't, because the folks who had the supply were not actually willing to transact, right? So there's no liquidity there. And that's a key. Another key for marketplaces is, what's the liquidity? So if someone on the demand side comes in to your marketplace and says, I'm looking to do the action that you promised your marketplace allows me to do, how fast can they get that done, right? So what's the match rate? So all of these things are the metrics that you're going to measure when you pressure test and have an hypothesis on, this is my supplier. You put that in place, and then you go pressure test there, and you're like, this is actually not my supplier. Let me move on to my next hypothesis. All right, great. Hopefully that was helpful. All right, thanks for sharing. Can we get one more example or one more volunteer? How is that have you pressure tested this already on knowing this is who we're going after? And if you have, like, what's been the feedback? Nice. No, thanks for sharing. And then I think you said something that's really key and important. Oftentimes, trying to figure out what side of the marketplace matters is hard. So obviously, I think you've got the right side of the marketplace that you need to give a little more TLC to, which is if I come to a business and I say, we run a marketplace that connects you to college students that can do X, Y, and Z. If they sign on, like, you have to match them as soon as possible. And I think for students, it's cherry on top if I can get something, right? So I think you have the right frame in there. Okay, thanks for sharing. And then I'm gonna wrap up. It's how are these two things connected that we just mentioned, these two frameworks. So jobs to be done and then ICP. If you can figure that out, you have product market fit, right? So if you have, this is why I do the thing and this is who I do the thing for, like, you have product market fit. Again, I make this sound so easy, but product market fit is literally like the hardest thing to get in startups. And it actually also moves over time, right? So we saw this with, and the only reason I remember this is you mentioned what you're working on, but there is, and now I'm blanking out on the company's name, but there's a company that students would find jobs on. And now with the whole AI push, they've gotten into actually having a lot of aggregated data around what students, like who students are and what students look for, right? So your business can shift if there's like a paradigm shift. But when you first launch, it is, okay, here's why I'm launching, here's who I'm launching for. And once I have that figured out, I have product market fit. So what I've seen as an investor, oftentimes I'll have founders who have the right product, but the wrong customers, or have the wrong customers, but a product that's great. And if there's a mismatch there, like, you're just gonna have a really, really hard time figuring things out. Yep. It's they're marketing the wrong way. So it's they're trying to market. They have the product, but they're trying to market the product as we talked about the functional, social, and emotional aspect. They're trying to market it like emotionally, right? And I see a lot of this with, like, when folks are trying to market things to women, they oftentimes are trying to market it like emotionally, where it's like women are not a monolith, right? So it's like, is this something that's going to be 10 times better functionally? Then that's what you need to lean in on. Or is this something that socially is going to be 10 times better? That's what you need to lean in on. So it's, again, it's the key. If you take nothing from what I said today, startups are experiments. And usually when you run an experiment, your first set of experiments doesn't really tell you much. What it tells you is you're wrong and you need to go back to the drawing board, right? So you just need to have different iterations of the thing that you're trying to do. Yep. And if there are no questions, I will wrap up there. Any questions? All right, thank you guys.